You lost, sweetheart? This is a Navy warship, not a tour stop. Chief Boatswain's mate Garrett Voss stood at the top of the brow and let the words carry, the way he let everything carry, so the whole watch could hear him own the morning. Pier tours are Saturdays. They don't start at the quarterdeck, and they don't start at 0630. So whatever you're looking for, it's back that way. Off my pier. The destroyer rose gray and cold behind him, 209 feet of it visible from the brow, more beyond, the hull a wall of haze-gray steel streaked with salt where the freeboard met the water. Mooring lines ran doubled to the bollards, 4 and 5, snug down for the weather that was coming off the Sound. The national ensign hung aft in the flat blue light of early morning, not yet stirred by wind. The air smelled of diesel and cold water, and the particular iron smell of a ship that has been to sea and will go again. The woman at the foot of the brow did not look lost. She wore a gray quarter zip and a ball cap pulled low, a canvas sea bag balanced on one shoulder by long habit. She was somewhere past 40. She stood without shifting her weight, both boots flat on the pier, and she held herself so still that a man in a hurry could have walked past her twice. She looked up at Voss. Then she looked past him, aft to the ensign, and for one beat, she brought her free hand up, a clean, short salute to the colors, and held it, and dropped it, before she set her boot on the first step of the brow. Voss did not notice. The 2 junior watchstanders behind him did not notice. Nobody notices the thing a person does out of 25 years of habit, because habit does not announce itself. "Permission to come aboard," the woman said. "No," Voss said, and laughed, because a laugh filled a quarterdeck and told everyone standing on it who owned the deck. "See, that's not how this works. Nobody comes up my brow without a name I like, an ID I like, and a reason I like even more. You've got none of the three. I'd like to see the officer of the deck," she said. The term landed on him wrong. Too clean. Civilians said whoever's in charge. Civilians said the captain, meaning nobody in particular. She had said officer of the deck, the way a person says a word they have said 10,000 times. He shook it off. "The officer of the deck is busy running a warship. He doesn't come down the brow for walk-ups." Voss planted one boot on the top step and folded his arms, filling the width of the brow with his body. Behind him the quarterdeck, the podium, the log, the tarnished bell, the watchbill taped inside the glass, his kingdom, and every soul on it a subject. "You can wait behind the chain. Like a civilian. That's the best offer you're getting from me today, sweetheart." She stepped back off the brow, unhurried, and stood behind the chain. She had walked up 100 brows in 8 countries. She read this one in 3 seconds, the tide making against the camel, the spring line gone slack, the lines doubled for the weather, the watchbill she could just see through the podium glass, with a name typed across the top she had not been shown. She knew the grammar of a quarterdeck better than the man guarding it. She said none of that. She set the sea bag at her feet and waited. Behind Voss at the podium, a first-class petty officer stopped writing in the deck log. His name was Damon Whitfield, 34 years old, 11 of them standing watches like this one. He looked at the woman behind the chain a second longer than the moment called for, the way a man looks at a shape in the fog that is not yet resolved into a thing he can name. Then he went back to his log, but his eyes came up again. And this time they stayed. The sun cleared the warehouse roofs across the basin and threw a hard line of gold down the pier, and the woman behind the chain did not move into it or out of it. She stood in the cold, and she watched the ship the way a doctor watches a patient breathe. She had all the time in the world. She had learned patience in places where impatience got people killed. Voss, at the top of his brow, decided the morning was going to be fun. He had no idea what he was standing in front of. Chief Voss liked an audience, and the duty section gave him one. He turned back to the woman behind the chain and raised his voice so the watch could enjoy it with him. "You even know what you're looking at, sweetheart?" He swept a hand at the ship like a man showing off a car he had not paid for. "Go on. Tell the nice sailors what kind of ship this is. Educate us." "An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer," she said. "Flight 2A. She did not raise her voice at all, which made everyone lean in to catch it. "You've got a slack spring line number 3, and the tide's making. In about 9 minutes your camel is going to load, and that line is going to snap taut. You'll want to tend it before it does." The quarterdeck went quiet for a half-second. Then Voss laughed again, louder, to bury it. "Look at that." She read a poster somewhere. "Flight 2A. He shook his head at the watch. "Everybody's an admiral until the coffee kicks in." She said nothing. She checked her watch once, not the impatient glance of a person waiting, but the flat, measuring look of a person timing something. 9 minutes later, the camel groaned. It was a long, low, complaining sound of steel taking a load, and the number 3 spring line came off its slack and stood up straight and hard as a bar, water squeezing out of the weave. Down the brow, Petty Officer Whitfield was already moving. He had heard her say it. He tended the line before it could do anything worse than groan, easing it, taking a turn off the cleat, and when it was handled, he straightened up and looked back at the woman behind the chain. She had called it off a cold glance from the pier. From 60 feet away, without a foot on the deck, in 9 minutes, to the minute. Whitfield had stood the quarterdeck of 3 ships. He had watched 1,000 people come up and down brows. Civilians did not do that. Fresh sailors did not do that. He knew perhaps 4 people in the fleet who could stand on a pier and tell you when a camel was going to load, and every one of them had spent their life on the water. He ran it back in his head while he stood there. The number 3 line. She had not counted the lines from the podium. She had counted them from the pier, from below, at a bad angle, in the flat morning light, and she had picked out the slack one and named it correctly. She had read the tide off the waterline on the camel and off nothing else. There was no poster that taught that. There was no manual. There was only 20 years of standing on decks in the dark, feeling a ship take a load through the soles of your boots, until you could look at still water and know what it was about to do. He had spent 11 years getting where she had been standing when she guessed. It was not a guess. He came back to the podium, and he said it low, only for the chief. "Chief." She called that line. "She guessed," Voss said, not looking at him. "That's not a guess. Stand your watch, Whitfield." Voss's jaw had set. He had made a decision about the woman behind the chain the moment he saw her, and a man like Voss did not revise a decision in front of the watch. Revision looked like weakness, and weakness was the one thing his whole life was built to never show. He turned back to her. "Here's your problem, sweetheart. You know a couple of words. That's cute. But knowing words doesn't get you up my brow. You could stand there and recite the whole tech manual. Still a no." He smiled. "You want to try threatening me now? Tell me you know somebody. They always tell me they know somebody." "No," she said. Just that. No, and the flatness of it, the total absence of the thing he was fishing for, unsettled him more than any threat would have. He needed her to push so he could push back. She would not give him the shove to lean on. A laugh fills a quarterdeck and tells everyone on it who owns the deck, and Voss needed the laugh more than he needed to be right. So he laughed, and the 2 junior watchstanders laughed with him, and the woman behind the chain looked at the ship and read it and waited. The duty section was mustering by then, sailors coming down the pier in 1s and 2s with coffee and sea bags, and Chief Voss found himself with the thing he loved most in the world, a bigger audience. Gather round," he said, cheerful now, gesturing at the woman behind the chain like a man at a carnival stall. "This is the tour lady. Thinks she's a sailor. Been quizzing me on my own ship all morning. Real expert." A seaman named Jonah Pettibone, 20 years old, and eager to be liked by the loudest man present, laughed and pulled out his phone and filmed a few seconds of it. 2 others grinned. It was easy to grin. The chief set the tempo, and the tempo said this was funny. So it was funny. That was the whole physics of the quarterdeck, and Voss had lived by it for 20 years. A chief is the son of a small world, and the junior sailors turn where he turns. He had never once had to be right. He only had to be loud and early and certain, and the deck would arrange itself around him. It had never failed him. He had no reason to think a gray morning and a woman with a sea bag would be the day it did. The woman behind the chain did not perform being humiliated, which is the only thing that makes humiliation entertaining. She stood with her sea bag at her feet, and she read the ship, the hull number, the fresh rectangle of haze gray where the freeboard had been touched up, the antenna suite, the bell that needed polish, the sloppy discipline of a deck log she could see being written badly from 30 feet away. She cataloged all of it the way she cataloged everything, without heat, filing each fact where it belonged. "Say something, sweetheart," Voss called, warming to the crowd. "Come on, cry a little, threaten to call somebody. Tell me I'll regret this. That's my favorite part." "I'll wait for the officer of the deck," she said. It was the 4th time she had said it. The first 3 times it had sounded like a request. This time, it did not sound like a request at all. It sounded like a fact she was reading off a page, the way she had read the tide. Something in that reached Pettibone before it reached anyone else. He was 20. He was not cruel, only young and wanting to belong. And there was something in the woman's absolute stillness, in the way she was not afraid of the loudest man on the pier, that made the phone feel suddenly heavy in his hand. He lowered it. He stopped laughing. He looked at his boots. The people who most deserve respect are almost never the ones demanding it. They have learned that the demand and the respect are 2 different things, and that only one of them arrives when you call it. If you have ever watched someone loud mistake a quiet person for a weak one, you already know how this morning ends. Stay with it. Subscribe to Honor Tales, and let the truth arrive on its own time. Chief Voss did not stop laughing. He was building to something, and the audience had put wind in him. He walked to the podium, and he picked up the quarterdeck phone, and he dialed the number for the base security desk. "Yeah," he said into the phone, loud enough for the woman to hear every word. "Quarterdeck. I've got an unauthorized visitor refusing to leave the pier. Female, no ID. Send a patrol down to walk her off. Appreciate it." He hung up. He looked at her, pleased with himself, and reached for the deck log. Chief Voss wrote in the log the way he did everything, out loud, for effect. 0642, he narrated, pen moving. Unauthorized female visitor refused departure. Security notified. He glanced up at her. "You're official now, sweetheart. You're in the log." "You'll want the time right in that log, Chief," the woman said, evenly, almost kindly. "And you'll want my name spelled correctly when someone asks you to read it back." That was all she said, but it was a strange thing to say, and it sat in Whitfield's chest like a stone, because it was the sentence of a person who knew, with total certainty, that the log was going to be read later by someone who mattered, and who was giving the chief one last chance to have written it right. Voss heard weakness in it. He always heard weakness. He wrote her name as unknown and underlined it twice. The base security patrol came down the pier a few minutes later, 2 patrolmen, unhurried. Voss met them at the top of the brow and performed command for them, pointing, explaining, a chief handling a problem. But the patrolmen, when they reached the woman behind the chain, did not do what patrolmen usually do. They slowed down. The senior of the two, a heavy-set man with gray at his temples, looked at her the way Whitfield had looked at her. Something in how she stood. Something that did not fit the story he had been told on the phone. "Ma'am," he said, careful, "you want to tell me what's going on here?" "I'm exactly where my orders put me," she said. "I'd like the officer of the deck to come to the brow. That's all I've wanted for 20 minutes. "You got orders?" the patrolman asked. "I do." She did not reach for them. She did not show them to him, or to Voss, or to anyone. She let the fact sit there, unopened, a door she had not yet chosen to walk through. The patrolman rubbed the back of his neck. "You could just show me, ma'am, and we could clear all this up." "I could," she agreed. "But the officer of the deck of this ship is the correct person to receive me, not you. No offense meant. Ask the OOD to come down. Then everyone gets their morning back." The patrolman had walked a lot of piers. He had run off a lot of people, protesters, lost contractors, drunk kids, a man once who thought a destroyer was a ferry. Every one of them had argued, or begged, or gotten loud, or cried. This woman did none of it. She stood with her boots flat and her voice level, and told him, without heat, that he was not the correct person to receive her, and she was right. And somehow, she made being right sound like a courtesy she was extending to him. He had been doing this work long enough to know that the people who make no noise are almost never the ones you should be worried about removing. They are the ones you should be worried about having removed. There was such total, unbothered certainty in it that the senior patrolman found himself nodding before he had decided to. He keyed his radio to raise the quarterdeck watch officer directly. And Voss, who could feel the morning slipping out of his hands, who needed to be the man who ended this, and not the man who was overruled, stepped in and waved the radio down. "Don't bother the OD with this," Voss said. "It's a walk-up. I've got it. I'll walk her down the pier myself." He needed to own it. On a ship, silence is often the sound of someone counting, and he had mistaken her silence for the empty kind. That's the end of it. He thought silence was surrender. He had no idea what it actually was. Down the brow at the podium, Petty Officer Whitfield had reached his limit. He could not shake the mooring line. He could not shake the salute to the ensign, the one nobody else had seen. He could not shake officer of the deck, said like a native word. He set his pen down, and he stepped off the podium, and he came to Voss's shoulder, and he said it low so the watch would not hear. "Chief, listen to me." She called the camel off a cold look, from the pier to the minute. She saluted the ensign before she stepped on the brow. She asked for the OOD by billet, not by name. She told you to spell her name right for whoever reads the log. Whitfield kept his voice flat and urgent. "Civilians don't do one of those things. She did all four. Walk it back, Chief, please. Walk it back now, while walking it back is still cheap." For 1 second, something flickered behind Voss's eyes. Doubt, maybe. The cold edge of a possibility. Then he shut it out. Because Whitfield was a first class, and Voss was a chief, and chiefs did not get talked off their own brows by their petty officers in front of the watch. "You worry about your log, Whitfield," Voss said. "I've been running brows since you were sweating through boot camp. I know a nobody when one walks up my pier." Whitfield looked at him a moment longer. Then he did the only thing left to do. He stepped inside, off the quarterdeck, into the passageway, to find the officer of the deck himself. He found Lieutenant Priya Anand at the quarterdeck desk, 2 frames in, 29 years old, sleeves rolled, signing for a stores delivery that had come aboard on the far side of the ship. She had been off the brow for the whole thing, which was how a loud chief had been able to run the morning unchecked. "Ma'am," Whitfield said, "there's a situation at the brow." "There's always a situation at the brow." She did not look up. "What kind?" A woman. Civvies. Sea bag. The chief's been running her off for 20 minutes and called security on her. But ma'am, Whitfield chose the words. She's not a civilian. I don't know who she is. But she reads a ship like she was born on one. And she keeps asking for you. By billet. She won't give the chief her name. Annand's pen stopped. She won't give her name, Annand repeated. No, ma'am. Just keeps asking for the officer of the deck. Out on the brow, the woman waited in the cold gold light, while the chief decided her mourning for her. She used the time the way she used all time. She kept reading the ship. The sideboy's line, gone sloppy. The bell, tarnished. The watch bill through the glass. A name typed across the top she still had not been shown. She read the ship she had traveled a very long way to command, and she let the chief write his own record in the log, in his own hand, for the person who would read it. Some people do not tell you who they are. They wait for the right person to ask. If you want to see who finally asks, and what happens to the man who never did, subscribe to Honor Tales and stay to the end. Lieutenant Annand set down her pen and reached for her cover. And out on the brow, Chief Voss reached for the woman's sea bag. To understand why the woman on the pier did not flinch at a loud man, you have to leave the brow for a moment and go where only you can go, inside her, into the years the chief could not see. Her name was Marisol Vega, and she had come to the sea with nothing. In the summer of 2001, she was 18 years old, a raw seaman recruit on a heaving deck in the rain, learning to throw a heaving line, so it uncoiled clean and landed where she aimed it. An old boatswain's mate. First class stood behind her that day, arms crossed, unimpressed, watching her miss again and again. When she finally landed one across the chalk, he did not praise her. He said only, "The sea doesn't care who your father was, Vega, or wasn't. It cares whether the line lands. Throw it again." She threw it again. She had been throwing it again ever since. There was no one behind her when she started. No father in the Navy. No uncle with sea stories. No one who had told her the water was hers to take. She had walked into a recruiter's office at 18 with a duffel and no plan past the next mile. And the sea had done what the sea does to a certain kind of person. It had asked her for everything, and, when she gave it, it had given her back a self she could stand to be. She chipped paint. She stood mid-watches in weather that put grown men on their knees at the rail. She learned every line and cleat and chalk by its right name. And then she learned the names, behind the names, the reasons, the way a ship is a single argument that the sea is always trying to win. She was good at it before anyone told her she was allowed to be. The deck plates got into her bones, the way salt gets into steel. Not all at once, but permanently, so that after enough years, you cannot say where the metal ends and the salt begins. She struck for boatswain's mate. She made second class. She got picked up for a commissioning program because a division officer saw a sailor who read the deck faster than officers, twice her age. And by 2008, she was an ensign, a Mustang, an officer who had first learned the ship from the bottom of it, on her knees, with a chipping hammer. And in 2013, at 30 years old, a lieutenant, she led a boarding team over the side of a suspect vessel in a black strait where the water gave back no light. The vessel had shown false papers and a nervous crew and a cargo that did not match its manifest. And the strait was the kind of black that swallows the horizon so that the water and the sky become one closed room. Her team went up the side on a caving ladder in body armor, into a deck they could not see the whole of, and for 90 seconds it was a boarding like any other. Hands shown, spaces cleared, the slow, careful grammar of putting a suspect ship under control. The narration does not linger on the 10 seconds after that. What matters is not the violence. What matters is that when it came, Fast and close and worse than the brief had promised, from a space they had called clear, Lieutenant Vega did not freeze and did not run and did not lose the deck. She held her team together on wet steel in the dark. She put herself between the trouble and the youngest sailor there. She gave 3 orders in a voice that never climbed, and the orders were right. And because they were right, her people did the thing they had trained 1,000 times to do, and the ship came under control, and she got them back to the ladder and over the side. Almost all of them. Boatswain's mate 2nd Class Emilio Cruz was 24 years old. He had a wife 8 weeks pregnant, and a laugh you could hear across a mess deck. He went down on the wet steel of that foreign deck, and Marisol Vega held the boarding until the last of the living were off, and she carried what could be carried, and she brought the rest of them home. They gave her the Bronze Star with the Combat Fine for that straight. She wore it exactly twice. The medal weighed almost nothing. The name weighed more than she could lift, and she carried it anyway, every day, the way you carry the ones who do not come back. Not as a wound you show, but as a ballast you never set down. She wrote the letter herself. She did not let the ship's office draft it. She sat in her stateroom for 2 nights and wrote to a young widow 8 weeks along about a laugh you could hear across a mess deck. And she said the true things, and none of the easy ones. And when the child was born, she remembered the birthday every year after, without a reminder. She had decided, on the flight home from that strait, the kind of officer she was going to be for the rest of her life. Not a loud one, not a careful of her record one. She was going to be the officer who was worth the cost of the sailors who followed her, because she had seen exactly what that cost was, weighed out on a wet deck, and she was never going to pretend it was anything less. That is why she waits at Browse now, patient, unbothered by a chief who mistakes volume for weight. She has stood on a deck where the stakes were real, where the cost was a man named Cruz and a child who would never hear that laugh. A loud man at a gangway is not, to her, a wound. He's not even an insult. He is a data point, the clearest one she will get all week, about how he leads when he thinks no one who matters is watching, and how a man treats the person he has not yet been told to respect is the truest thing you will ever learn about him. She had read Chief Voss in 90 seconds. She had been reading him all morning and letting him keep writing, which is exactly where the memory ends, because that is the instant Chief Voss's hand closed around the strap of her sea bag. "That's it," Voss said. "Off my ship." His hand closed on the strap of her sea bag, and his other hand took her arm above the elbow, and he pulled, not gently, a man's whole weight behind it, marching her toward the pier the way you move a thing rather than a person. "You can explain yourself to the base cops. I gave you every chance to walk. You didn't want to walk. Now, we do it my way." The quarterdeck tensed all at once. Whitfield, coming back through the passageway, froze on the last step. The senior security patrolman moved fast, a hand up. "Chief, hands off her. That's not your call to make, and you know it." Marisol Vega did not pull away. She looked down at the hand on her arm. Then she looked at the hand on her sea bag. Then she looked up into Chief Voss's face, and for the first time all morning, she read him the way she had read the ship. Openly, completely, cataloging every part of him and filing it where it belonged. The heat in his eyes, the audience he was performing for, the particular fear underneath the noise, the fear of a man who has just realized, somewhere below thought, that he might be wrong, and who is holding on precisely because letting go would mean admitting it. And then Commander Marisol Vega smiled. It was a small smile. It was not cruel. It was almost kind. The smile of a person who has just been handed the last piece of information she needed, and is grateful, in a distant way, to finally have it. "You should let go of me, Chief," she said quietly. "Only for him. For your sake. Not mine." The smile did what no threat could have done. It went through him like cold water down the collar. A threat he could have leaned on. A threat would have told him he was right. The smile told him he had walked out onto a ledge in the dark, and there was no floor under his next step. But he had an audience, and letting go now, in front of the watch, the security patrol, the duty section, the seaman with the phone, was its own kind of falling. So he held on. He had talked himself all the way out onto the ledge, one loud sentence at a time, from 0630 to now, and there was no loud sentence that walked a man back. Whitfield saw it from the ladder and felt his stomach drop, because he understood before anyone what the smile meant. He had watched her all morning. He knew now, with a cold certainty, that the woman his chief had by the arm was not a problem to be walked off a pier. She was a reckoning that had already arrived and was simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. And the chief was still pulling. His hand tightened on her arm. And that was the exact moment Lieutenant Priya Anand reached the top of the brow. She took in the whole scene in one sweep. The woman, the chief's hand on her arm, the security patrol, the frozen watch. And her voice cut across the quarterdeck flat and hard, the voice of the one commissioned officer standing on that deck. "Chief Voss, take your hand off her. Now." The reveal did not come with a shout. It came with a piece of paper. Voss let go of the arm, but not the certainty. "Ma'am, this is an unauthorized civilian. I've been trying to—" "Be quiet, Chief." Anand stepped past him to the woman, and by instinct, before she knew a single thing, she said the word that had eluded every other person on that brow all morning. "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Anand, the officer of the deck. May I see some identification?" "Ma'am," the first person in 2 hours to read her right. Marisol Vega reached into the inside pocket of her jacket, and she took out a military ID and a set of folded orders, and she handed them across. "Commander Marisol Vega," she said, "reporting aboard for duty." Anand unfolded the orders. She read the first line and the second, and her eyes went down the page and then came back up to the top and read it again, the way people reread words that have rearranged the floor beneath them. "Detached, to report aboard, and assume command." The blood left Lieutenant Anand's face. She looked up from the orders to the woman standing in the gray quarter zip with the sea bag Chief Voss had by the strap. Then she looked at Voss's hand, still on the strap, and her voice came out very quiet and very careful. "Chief," she said, "let go of the captain." The word moved through the quarterdeck like a change in pressure before a storm. "Captain." Whitfield let out a breath he had been holding for an hour. Pettibone went rigid, the phone forgotten in his hand. The security patrolman straightened, and Chief Voss's fingers opened on the strap of the sea bag all on their own, before his mind had caught up to what his body already understood. "Ma'am," Voss said, that's not... She has orders to command this ship, Chief." Anand's voice shook once, and then steadied. "Signed, she's your commanding officer, and you've had a hand on her for the last 2 minutes." Voss's face began to move. First confusion, the honest, animal confusion of a man whose story of the morning had just been deleted while he was still inside it. Then disbelief, a small shake of the head. No, because no was the last defense he had. Then recognition, arriving all at once and from every direction. The salute to the ensign, the camel, the billet, the name she'd told him to spell right, the smile, all of it landing in the same half-second. Every clue he had laughed at, now standing up straight and hard as that spring line under load. And then, last, horror. The pure white horror of a man who has finally seen the size of the thing he had been mocking, and the size of the drop under the ledge he chose. Lieutenant Anand turned and stepped to the 1MC and lifted the microphone, and her hand was almost steady. The boatswain's pipe sounded first, high and clean over the ship. Then the bell, the tarnished bell the captain had noted from the pier, rang out the strokes. And then the word passed, fore and aft, over every speaker on every deck, into the mess and the berthings and the pilot house, and out onto the weather decks, where sailors stopped where they stood. Commanding officer, United States ship, arriving. And the ship came to attention, not because a call sign was called, not because a formation was mustered, because a piece of paper was true, and because a Navy that has done this for 250 years knows exactly how to receive the person that paper names. On the quarterdeck, on the decks above, wherever the word reached, men and women came to attention around the woman in the gray quarter zip, and Chief Garrett Voss stood rigid among them, at a position of attention he could not take back, could not undo, could not laugh his way out of, while the captain he had called sweetheart bent down, unhurried, and picked up her own sea bag before anyone could take it from her. She straightened. She returned Lieutenant Anand's salute, clean and crisp, the salute of a woman who had rendered and received 10,000 of them. Then Commander Marisol Vega stepped onto her ship, past the chief, who could not meet her eyes now, and did not have the right to look away. Here is what a smaller story would have done next. It would have had her relieve him on the spot. It would have had the security patrol take him by both arms. It would have ended with a court-martial, an investigation, a man in a courtroom. That is not what she did. Commander Vega stepped onto the quarterdeck and stood for a moment at the top of her brow, and she looked at the watch, at Whitfield, at Pettibone, at the security patrol, at the chief standing rigid and gray. She did not raise her voice. She had not raised it once all morning, and she did not need to start now. A brow, she said, is the first thing anyone learns about a ship. Before they meet the crew, before they see the mission, they meet whoever is standing at the top of it. That person is the ship, for as long as they're the only sailor a visitor can see. She let that sit. This morning, that person did not know who I was. Good. He shouldn't have needed to. How this watch treated a person it did not yet recognize is the truest measure of this ship I will ever get. I got it. We're going to talk about what I saw, all of us, but not with cuffs and not with a crowd. She named no punishment. She ordered no arrest. And somehow, the absence of it landed heavier on Chief Voss than any charge could have, because a charge would have given him something to fight, and she had given him nothing but the plain, unbearable fact of what he had done, and the knowledge that the woman who now owned his career had chosen, freely, not to end it in front of the crew. Dignity outlasts noise. It always has, on every deck, in every century. If this is the kind of story you came looking for, the quiet kind, where the truth needs no volume, subscribe to Honor Tales for more. Later, in the passageway outside the captain's cabin, one-on-one, with no watch to perform for, Chief Voss stood in front of Commander Vega and had nowhere to put his hands. She did not relieve him. She let the silence run a moment first, the way she let everything run. I was a boatswain's mate before you could tie a bowline, Chief, she said finally. I threw heaving lines in the rain when I was 18 and got told the sea doesn't care who I was. I know exactly what you are on a good day, because I have been you on a good day. Loud, sure, running my deck, certain I could read anyone who walked up it. Her voice stayed level. This wasn't a good day. You rid a person off her clothes, and you never once corrected when the evidence came in. Your own petty officer told you to walk it back, and you pulled rank on him to keep from having to. That's the part that matters to me. Not that you didn't know me, that you couldn't be wrong. She let that land. She was not enjoying it. That was the thing Voss would turn over for years afterward, on long mid-watches, trying to understand it, that she took no pleasure in any of it, that a woman he had handed every reason to destroy him had looked at him instead, with something closer to recognition than to anger, as though she were reading a younger, louder version of a sailor she had known a long time and was sorry to see make the oldest mistake there is. Voss's throat worked. "Ma'am, I don't have anything to say that's worth your time. You have one thing." She looked at him. "You get one chance to be the chief those anchors are supposed to mean. One. I'm not going to hang you in front of the crew, and I'm not going to forget this either. You're going to earn back the deck you embarrassed this morning. Slowly. The hard way. Don't make me sorry, Chief." For the first time all day, stripped of the audience he lived for, Chief Garrett Voss said the only correct sentence available to him. "Aye, Captain." She let him go. On her way forward, she stopped at the quarterdeck. She found Whitfield and held his eyes a moment. "You did the right thing this morning," she said. "You stepped off your podium and went to find your OOD when your chief wouldn't listen. That took more than knowing the answer. It took saying it out loud to a man who outranked you. I saw it. I won't forget that either." Whitfield, who had expected nothing, could only nod. And near the bell, young Seaman Pettibone, who had held a phone up and laughed, and then stopped laughing, was already at the deck log, squaring away the sloppy entries without being told, spelling every name right, because a chief had written unknown and underlined it twice, and the ship had come to attention anyway. He was 20. He had learned something at the top of the brow that would outlast every tour he ever stood, that the ship does not come to attention for the loudest voice on the deck, that it comes to attention for the truth, and that the two are almost never the same person. Word of the morning went through the ship the way word always goes through a ship, faster than any wire, so that by the time Commander Vega reached the wardroom, every sailor aboard already knew that the new captain had stood behind a chain for 2 hours and been called sweetheart, and had never once raised her voice or reached for her rank to end it. A crew learns who its captain is in the first hour, and hers had learned it before she ever set foot in her own cabin. They had learned that she would not spend a sailor to save her own dignity, and that she would not spend her dignity to punish a sailor either. It was the kind of thing that cannot be ordered, and cannot be faked, and cannot be earned twice. She had earned it before breakfast, at the top of her own brow, from the wrong side of a chain. That evening, at sunset, the ensign came down on the fantail to the long note of colors, and Commander Marisol Vega stood alone on the bridge wing with the harbor gone gold beneath her. She thought of a black strait and a wet deck, and a boatswain's mate named Cruz, 24 years old, and the laugh you could hear across a mess deck. She thought of it for exactly one beat, the way you let ballast settle. Then she let it settle. No message came. No presumed dead name lit up a phone. No foreign port called her onward to the next thing. There was only the ship under her boots, the tide going slack, the gold light on the water, and a woman who had come to the sea with nothing at 18 and had just walked up a brow, past a man who called her sweetheart, to command a warship. She had learned the ship from the bottom. Now she owned all of it, keel to masthead, and she knew, better than any officer who had come to it easy, exactly what it was worth, and exactly what it cost, and exactly how a crew watches a captain to find out which of those two things she cares about more. She thought for a moment about the man standing his rest below decks, the chief who had called her sweetheart at the top of her own brow. She did not hate him. Hating him would have been a kind of respect she was not prepared to spend. She hoped he would take the one chance she had given him and become the chief his anchors promised. She thought he might. Most people, given the plain truth and a clean way to carry it, eventually do. And if he did not, the sea would tell her. The way the sea tells you everything, in its own time, and she would be standing right there when it did. She was home, on the water, where the sea does not care who your father was, only whether the line lands. Marisol Vega watched the colors come down, and she was exactly where her orders had put her. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.